Coming up this Saturday on Beyond the Vibe, I'm joined by Sonja Kristina of Curved Air.
We were a new band and we were loud and very dynamic, and Francis made some really, he played a symphony of odd noises and things at the end of Vivaldi, which was what we used to end our shows with. I was surprised, but they are our fans and Black Sabbath fans. I mean, they all seem to be into our show. I arrived in my sort of green corduroy lace-up hippie dress and brown corduroy cloak and green shades.
It's a bold look to approach an audition.
And Gary Moore supported us. Supported Curved Air as we were kind of going through the years. When he was just a teenager then. So, got my coffee here to make sure I'm awake to talk to you.
Did you go to bed late last night or something? Tired?
Yeah, no, I get tired, but I have to sort of pace myself during the day. I've got lots to do. I'm preparing for Brazil.
It's an exciting thing, I imagine.
Yeah, it is. It's the whole thing is taking off quite nicely. Now the pandemic is finished.
I know. It's I'm just glad to get it out of the way with. It's like back to normal now.
Oh, there you are. There's your room.
Oh yes, I have a yeah, it's a multi-camera setup. There you go. You see, complete with lights.
You get multi views of you.
Yes, yeah. For when I do the in-person ones, at least everybody gets multi views. Right. So I'm here with Sonja Kristina of Curved Air. Thank you very much for taking the time to chat with me.
Oh, you're welcome. It's nice to meet you. I know your dad.
Yes.
Your mum.
Yeah. He recommended you, obviously, and here we are. So a thing that we like to do is I like to go to the very beginning of how everything kind of began. So of course you're originally from Brentwood in Essex. What was it like growing up for you, and kind of what first attracted you to music?
When I was a solitary kid, I was my brothers were much older than me, so I sort of entertained myself with going in depth into things like reading and workbooks, sort of things where you kind of have to start at the beginning and get to the end, things sort of which I kind of did for myself, because one needed something to do once you got past the age of playing with dolls and things. And so I watched a bit of telly like everybody did, and there was Ready Steady Go was on in the kind of, I'm not sure when that was on. It was in about 19. Do you know when Ready Steady Go started? You're too young.
Yeah.
Well, I watched a bit. I saw some music on the TV, and that was, that inspired me, and I listened to that was when I was sort of young, like sort of before I was like, when I was about 8 or 9 or 10, and my mother's was brought up by a famous actress in Sweden, and I was brought up thinking that she was my grandmother. And it wasn't until after my mother died that my brother announced, she's not really our grandmother, and it turned out that my mother had been adopted, and so but still had a lot of input into my mother's life and things. And so she used to, when I decided I wanted to sing, and I decided I wanted to sing, I was really into Dusty Springfield. I thought she was, I followed her right from the very beginning, from the Springfields, and just something about her presence was very, very, very charismatic and powerful. She wasn't like a girly girl. I always think of girls like me as there's girls like me, and then there's girly girls, who wear dresses and have handbags and go out with the girls and things. Whereas that's, since I didn't really meet anybody much when I was little, I sort of, I mean, I had the older brothers and things. But anyway, I'm jumping about. I tend to jump about a lot when I'm talking. So am I talking about music yet? When my grandma came over to see us, my mormor, being Swedish, she listened to me sort of singing a bit when I was must have been quite small, must have been about 5 or 6 or something like that. And she said, "Oh, it's not so airy, you don't have so much airs." Not that I kind of knew how to not make a lot of air, but I mean that comment sort of stuck with me. And then I sang a verse of The Holly and the Ivy at school, and I was looking. It was obviously a carol concert in this sort of little hall that we had, and everybody seemed to be really, really engrossed, and when I finished it, everybody was going, "Oh, lovely, lovely." I thought, well, that's nice. They like that. So, so that there was that, and we had a singing teacher who, which is the class teaching. I don't know if that's relevant at all, but she, I really, really liked her. She was really nice, and but this was also in sort of primary school. But I read something that Dusty Springfield said, that she really enjoyed being out on the road and living out of a suitcase. I thought, oh yes, that sounds good. That appeals to me. That's something else that stuck in my mind. So then, so with all the pop stars and things like that, I think the only other pop star I was into was Adam Faith. Who there's, "What do you want if you don't want money?" and things. And I just thought he was very, very, very handsome. I liked the way that he looked. I think I liked that type. And I was really young, and my mother brought me my first single. And when I was older, I used to go to get singles from a record shop in Grays, because I actually lived in North Stifford, which is near Grays in Essex, which is sort of near what is now Lakeside and things. So then I had some guitar lessons at school in Brentwood, and then what I learned a little bit there, but then I started teaching myself from a book which had all chords in and things like that, and I learned how to read music. I taught myself on a book called A Tune a Day for guitar, and I also used to speak. I did sort of elocution lessons, what it was, where we did, sort of one-to-one. Because I like words and poems and things, and so I used to take part in poetry contests before I was 11 and before I went off to big school. And I remember enjoying that, the feeling of performing, standing on a big stage with, which was with nobody really there, but except somebody who was just maybe judging you or just I guess the teacher or whatever. But in the poetry competitions, they were some of them were on stages, and some of them were just in a kind of a classroom with everybody around the edge, and you do your bit. But I'd really like the feeling of getting really into the story and characters of what I was doing, and the sound of my voice in the silence, and the feeling that I was kind of carrying people with me. You know, that was something that I enjoyed, and so I got good. I did well with poetry speaking, and then I was listening to a lot of the stuff that was the sort of New York folk, not really folk, but sort of beat club folk, the beatnik beat, the beats and the writers and all these. I fancied myself as a bit of a beatnik by the time I was 12, and I used to wear denims and denim trainers and a denim jacket, and I thought that was very
a lot of denim.
a lot of denim, yeah, and because that seemed to sort of sum things up. But I started learning these songs that I was singing in this book, which was 101 American folk songs. So and then I learned how to transpose songs, because I realized my voice is actually quite deep. And when I'm singing with lots of other people, I can never sing in the sort of regular keys, because it's actually, my voice gets tight. I mean, now I'm much older. I've had some, I understand my voice more. But anyway, you wanted to know how I began, so that's sort of a rough summary of my childhood.
Musical. Yeah. Of course, that kind of carried on, didn't it? Where you were in the musical Hair. How did that kind of role in that like influence you later in your career? Like, I imagine that's kind of a real solid foundation to have that kind of experience.
Well, I had gone to drama school. I'd carried on studying voice and taking drama exams and things, and so but I left. I was also doing a lot of performing from when I was 13. I was playing in folk clubs, and so I just was only 1 year at the drama school in Hampstead, which was, and then because that was really when, because I was really kept an eye on, because I was a bit wayward as a teenager. I used to skip school to see boys and things, and so in fact it got so bad that I was suspended, and I could only go back to school to take my A-levels if my parents took me back and forth. This was for the school, so I decided that because I was just missing too much school. But then that's a long story. I mean, that kind of evolved and was involved various factors. But so that first year when I was actually on my own in London, that was fantastic. because the drama school kids, were obviously different from normal students. So we hung out with the kids from the young people from the art colleges too. So there was Hornsey Art College, and through my best friend, who was a girl in a couple of years older than me when I was in the first year at college, I got introduced to people like the Pink Fairies and Mick Farron who was a journalist who wrote for International Times. So I was really, I was with some really kind of interesting people, and we used to go down to Middle Earth and watch. And the first time I went to Middle Earth, I saw the Incredible String Band, which who I'd loved, you know, from their first album, amongst all the other folk people that I used to listen to. And so yeah, I was now, you know, having been a tearaway, I was now tearing away even more. You know, I was singing, playing my guitar, singing my songs, and meeting people, and just generally experiencing the London, the Roundhouse, the Speakeasy, all these clubs that we used to get into. And so my college, you know, like my school had sort of put the brakes on. The college said, well, look, you know, your work's not bad, but I kept falling asleep in lectures and things, and because I was, you know, staying up late and burning the candle at both ends, and it was kind of obvious, I think. And so they said, well, go and take a year off, you know, have a year of absence. And so I did that. And then I had a manager for my sort of folk, or my sort of acoustic performances, I suppose you'd call it, because it wasn't really folk that I did. It was just a mixture of songs that I liked from the whole scene. And I was in his office, and he'd seen an ad for auditions for Hair, you know, and I was a total hippie from 16, really. I was, you know, my denims had evolved into sort of caftans and bells and bell around my neck and things, and I also wore you know, very, very, very short sort of 60s type dresses as well. But I think the 60s type dresses were, they kind of got that was when I was around about 15, 16, I think. And then gradually I became more and more, went everywhere barefoot, all around London, all around the Hampstead Heath. You know, my feet got really hard, and so spent a lot of time on the Heath with bunches of friends, and you know, and I got to know people like Jeff Dexter from the who was a DJ at the and a promoter at the Roundhouse. You know, just in, you know, it was, London was happening. It was a happening scene, man. You know, it was kind of as they
falling into contacts, just randomly bumping into people.
Yeah, and you know, and you know, sort of, and having lovers, and which in those days was sort of incidental to meeting people. You know, if you fancied somebody, you know, it wasn't the same as like wouldn't be dating. It would just be, you know, sleeping together for a night or a couple of hours, whatever. but you know, there'd be, you know, and all the other things that went with swinging London. Swinging London was really the mid-60s. That's the mini dresses and things, and there was the and in the mid-60s in London there was the whole mods thing going on as well. There was that was people on scooters and fighting down in Southend, and mods and rockers. Yeah, so I mean, it was a really good time, really, you know, really. And the thing is that, you know, now that there's people are so worried about gang violence and you know, stranger people, you know, people beating up strangers and things like that, but I never felt threatened the whole time when I was wandering around. I'd be hitchhiking, and because that was popular too. So no, I still haven't got into hair yet, have I? I've been he said go and my manager Roy Guest, who was an important man in in the concert world, and he said go and audition for this. So I went and auditioned and got called back lots of times. I had a friend from the art college who brought his little keyboard and accompanied me whilst I sang "Can I Get a Witness?" and they wanted to have good movers, so I wiggled a bit, and whilst I was singing "Can I Get a Witness?" and I think I sang the Donovan song, the took a trip downtown today, that one, and waving my arms as hippies do. So so I got into that show. But my friend Mick Farron lived upstairs from the Shaftesbury Theatre. So, and I used to go there in between shows when we had two shows on there would be I'd go up there and hang out with Mick Farron, and he was best friends with all the London Hells Angels, because he used to put on free festivals, and it was all those people that I was getting to know, and poets and just people in other bands. Because as I've been traveling around as a teenager, I've been meeting up other musicians, obviously, and they've been showing me a few chords. And when I was living up in London, I was kind of, I met Tom Paxton, which was, and I was at a place where everybody was hanging out together, and it was Trevor Lucas's place, where Sandy Denny's partner, and so this was exciting for me. Because Tom Paxton, I sang a few Tom Paxton songs, and so he was there. And Sandy Denny, I ran into several times. I was supporting her in folk clubs and things.
And then after that, of course, I'm correct in saying you were approached to be in what would become Curved Air, or is it kind of?
Yeah. This was I'd been in Curved Air. I've been in here 2.5 years, and I wanted something else to do, and it just coincidentally, with that desire, became a phone call from my manager on New Year's, on the 1st of January 1970, about this band, and how their manager, he had come to see him, to ask if I wanted to audition for them. So I went and met them, and I sang Melinda More or Less, in fact, which is one of my songs. So Melinda was a song that I'd written when I was 18, when I was sort of in my kind of before I was in hair. And so I sang that to them, which was kind of representative of what I was doing. I arrived in my sort of green corduroy lace-up hippie dress and brown corduroy cloak and green shades, and I was driving a white Triumph Herald. And,
it's a bold look to approach an audition with.
Well, it's because whilst I was in hair, I had a baby, and so he was living with my parents, and so I was going back and forth for some time to back to Grays, and from Grays to London after shows. And then when I was in Curved Air, once we started working together, then we all moved into a flat in Hampstead, and we all lived together for the first 3 years of the band, until it sort of fragmented for the first time.
Of course, a lot of people say that particularly back then, you had kind of a different kind of, you were doing a different thing to what other people were doing. You know, a lot of people say, you know, around that time, you know, progressive rock was like kind of a new thing from, you know, rock and pop music. What was kind of, you know, when you're coming up with these songs at that time, what was like the thought process behind that? Because like a lot of people nowadays, they say, oh, you know, my influence is such and such, but like particularly for like progressive rock, I don't know like where you would pull that from back then.
Well, the band had been to, the two main writers in the band had been to music college, and you know, and they were being influenced by everything that was happening in rock music, you know, like West Coast rock and Jimi Hendrix, and as well as the kind of new contemporary classical weirdness that would be happening. You know, people just sitting, not playing anything for ages, and occasionally banging something that would be a score. You know, and there was a lot of strangeness going on, but so they had written a bunch of music which they had started performing just as it was, but it didn't have lyrics, and so they wanted me to write lyrics. And occasionally they had, you know, a first line or a first verse or whatever, but then I kind of finished it off, and it was just, the music was so atmospheric, and the tunes were so singable, and that it was, you know, it was quite inspiring. It was very inspiring, and it was, and so we went away before we did, after we'd started rehearsing together, we went away to the bass player's family home in Gloucestershire, and we rehearsed in a barn there, and that was when I really began to feel that things were happening, you know, because I liked rock music, and I didn't really know they had heard people like King Crimson and the other kind of really out there prog bands. I mean, even Genesis probably started around about the same time as we did. So they were more influenced by the strange stuff around, and Francis, our keyboard player, he was into modulating sounds, which was also a thing that was new then, having the electronic devices that you could actually take home and play with the sounds that you would then be able to trigger from your keyboard or from your VCS3 synthesizer and things with cables and things. So, and then we had an electric violinist, which was and that was fairly new. There were other violinists in bands, but they were very much more folk or rock. And Daryl was, you know, he had that sort of classical flair. Those melodies that were in the songs were under his fingers too, you know, and the arrangements were they could arrange things, you know, so it was like having our own arrangers there, and rather than everything's sort of coming from, you know, a rock direction. A lot of the bands around were, you know, like the Doors and Pink Floyd were, you know, they were rock, but they also were like spacey, psychedelic and things. So that was cool. And I remember before I was in here listening to a lot of Pink Floyd in various bedsit rooms and all the, and a lot of the other things. Arthur Lee's Love I liked. So, you know, I didn't really know that much about classical music, and I didn't really know that much about progressive rock. In fact, it wasn't called progressive rock then. They were just different kinds of bands. It was a kind of experimentation. It was a time for pushing the boundaries. You know, how loud can you amplify yourself? You know, how bizarre can you make make the sounds, and where can you, how long can you play your solos for, and you know, and it was an interweaving of sort of jazz and classical and Indian music, and not so much Curved Air was. Curved Air was like sort of interesting motifs and rhythms, and you know, yeah, it was cleverly arranged, I think. And then I just kind of did my thing on top. And what was really good was they didn't tell me what to do. And I remember standing in the speakeasy, and which was an early date that we did, and I was kind of moving to the music, and Francis said, yeah, you dance, you know. And so they're very encouraging of what I did. And so I really got into the physicality of communicating with an audience, physically as well as vocally. You know, the songs I communicated much like I would communicate poetry, and you know, and I would inhabit in my head a range of different characters to deliver my songs, and which was all me, and you know, and I would project being a hippie and all, and I used to go down to the Spiritualist Association, as well as one of the places I used to spend a lot of time in Belgrave Square, and there were books on yoga and spirituality, and I attended classes in mediumship, and so I saw performing as a kind of shamanic ritual, you know, where you and the audience kind of got onto some plane together, you know, that you've, whatever I transmitted was communicated to the people in the audience, and obviously they wouldn't think the same, I've got the same images as, but when you're reading a book, you know, you get your own images in your head, don't you? And not necessarily what the writer wrote, but you get the feelings and the visions, you know. So it was so therefore I gave my audiences, you know, a lot of my energy, my love, and they returned it too, you know. So I was very physical with the, you know, they were nearly all boys, and you know, it was you know, that was really, it really was loving. You know, they have their hands out on the front of the stage, and we'd make contact as I sort of went along the front row and things. So, you know, it's just kind of, it was very special for them, and it was special for me too. You know, it was just kind of the fact that they were getting into a kind of a trance with the music, and it wasn't sort of, you know, it wasn't like at the beginning, you know, it certainly it wasn't sort of sexual. It was more to do with, it was just human, you know.
Of course, when I was doing my research for this episode, I found that you'd gone and supported Black Sabbath. Like in today's world, you don't really see that. Speaking of genres, you don't really see that mix of genres on the same bill. Like, how did that kind of come about? Because like today, that would be kind of like, you know, you see metal bands or rock bands, they're supported by a band that's quite similar, or, you know what I mean, they kind of have similar vein of music.
Yeah, well, we were a new band, and we were loud and very dynamic. You know, the boys put on a good show, and you know, so it was good to watch. And all these, and Francis made some really, you know, psychedelic, weird. You know, he played a symphony of odd noises and things at the end of Vivaldi, and So Vivaldi being the main sort of violin piece, which was what we used to end our shows with. And yeah, I mean, I was surprised, but you know, our fans and Black Sabbath fans, I mean, they all seem to be into our show, and presumably our fans stayed for Black Sabbath as well.
I mean, it's interesting because, I mean, when I spoke to Andy Scott a while ago, the Sweet, he mentioned back then in that era, you'd have festivals and bands with support bands and such, that it was all just kind of music. It didn't really matter what area of that. So like it could be prog, well, what would be prog rock, it could be hard rock, it could be this, that, and the other. But I think people maybe were more receptive to trying different things, perhaps. Like kind of, as you meant,
because there were people like who were playing the same sort of festivals roundabouts of the early 70s. I mean, there's Long John Baldry, Rod Stewart, who was then Rod the Mod, and there was Chicken Shack, and Stevie Winwood from I think he was with the Spencer Davis band. He wasn't with I think the Spencer Davis band came after Traffic. I don't know. I mean, he was still very young. But yes, so there was a lot of really good music around. But, good rock and blues and rhythm and blues, and that was the sort of and then there were the kind of incredible string bands and people like me who played guitar and sang songs, and a few of those. But I mean, but they would play at the Paul Simons and Bob Dylans and things. They would play. So progressive rock sort of was kind of a bit of yeah. I mean, it was just music. It was really well played, sort of virtuoso performances of music. A great guitarists there around it, Steve Marriott and Gary Moore supported us. Supported Curved Air as we were kind of going through the years. When he was just a teenager then. But I love I Gary Moore and Phil Lynott are the Thin Lizzy. I love that, really like their music. But Gary Moore supported us, and I think Skid Row, which is also Gary Moore. I mean, I think they had the same management, because often it comes with being on the same label or having the same management. That you would go out together then.
It's interesting because like you wouldn't, like in today's world, you perhaps wouldn't associate a guitarist like Gary Moore being on the same bill. Like it doesn't really happen now. You don't really see that so often. So I think it'd be nice to kind of see a return to something like that, where you have that kind of range. Maybe at a festival or something like that. But it's just interesting. Jumping forward. By the time this episode will be released, of course, you'll be about to play some shows in Brazil, which is always exciting.
Yeah, and we're doing a different thing. We're doing it as a 3-piece because it's financially easier for us, and so we thought, well, let's do it with the three of us, and with three with the guitar, violin, and me. And because we over the pandemic, we'd been wanting to go to Brazil and due to go to Brazil for quite a while, but we actually had a firm date in 2020, but obviously that was postponed, and then there was another one for 2021, and then that was postponed. So this is our sort of third time lucky. When you've got really, really good musicians, they're in demand. So we need to kind of get enough income to be able to pay them as well. So we've got Patreon thing, which seems to be working. I mean, we need to get a lot more people behind it. We meet online every now and again, and listen to Curved Air stuff, listen to my stuff, listen to other music that they like, and that seems to be a good common ground. And I'm sort of getting to know them, and they're really, really interesting, because obviously they're music lovers and music experts. And
of course, we mentioned a few gigs in Brazil, and you've done a bit of a tour. And do you have any plans for an album or a release going forward?
Yeah, we in early 2020 we went to Japan, and Japan really liked the fourth album, Aircut, and which is very, very, it's actually very, very, very popular. It's been a very slow burner. It's taken all these years to sort of to percolate through everybody. I mean, there were people now say, oh, it's always been their favorite. So but the band that I had then didn't stay around long enough to kind of really promote it. So we based the set that we did in Japan on the Aircut songs, because they liked that, and we hadn't actually performed them much, and so now we're performing them in our shows this year. So this is basically our 50th anniversary, because 50th anniversary was actually in 2020, I think. We recorded that set, but it wasn't that well recorded, but but it was really well played. And so our keyboard player, in between other things that he's doing, he's been kind of perfecting the sound and getting it to sound really, really good. So he's producing it, and we released 2 tracks from it for our March tour, and that they were up. It was 232 from and another one called Ishiban Girl, which was something that Daryl and I wrote about, which happened to be about sort of being in Japan. So it was appropriate to perform it in Japan. So we're he's mixing it, and so it just as of yesterday we were talking. He and I, Robert and I, were just discussing now. He feels ready to put another burst of energy into it, because he's doing it by himself, and then me and Beric and Kirby, Beric being our sort of personal manager, we feed back to him on what he's done and things, and so we kind of mix from a distance. We're in the control room, but we're not, and so we hope to. I really want to get it ready, finished. There's no reason why now it shouldn't be ready by the September gigs, if not before. And it was really, really well performed, and it was it was this lineup that we're on tour with now.
One question I like to finish on before we go. It's a bit of a hypothetical question. If you could tour with one band from the past and one band from the present, who would they be? So you've got your time travel device, so there's no limitations.
Well, but we've already toured with some pretty exciting bands, but I think
there's a few.
David Bowie from the past, and from the present. Well, I mean, the bands that are still the bands that from the past are still going in the present. I like Osric Tentacles, who I sort of hooked up with back in the 1980s. So Now, who would I want to tour with now? I don't know. Robert and I were talking about it. We're just thinking around if we want to go, what would be a good double bill for us, you know.
Mm.
And I think there are some really good progressive rock bands in Scandinavia. So I think, you know, and they're obviously they're a new generation of players, because we're the old guard, and there's when we did a progressive rock festival in Italy, and that was really interesting. They're much more sort of out there. They're playing more experimental music, you know. They're
Mm.
and yeah, I mean, it's interesting. It's interesting seeing new people being progressive, really, because that's what prog music is. It's supposed to be something that's not rock or indie or pop. You know, it's just, it can be anything. You know, it's whatever you want to make it.
Mm. I think that's the interesting thing about the genre. It's kind of you have all these bands that are in that circle, but they all sound quite different. You know, you can't kind of you know, like for example, thrash metal. They all sound, you know, they've all got that distinctive vibe about them. Whereas, as you say there, you know, you can take prog wherever you want to take it, really. You know, there's there's a lot of room. Well, thank you very much for joining me. Of course, for people out there, you know, that are wondering about a new album, keep your eyes peeled for that. Maybe September time, possibly.
It's September for the live album, but then once we finished that, well, there'll be a space between the end of all the production and stuff and the release, because of, you know, the band management kind of organizing the release. But then I'm going to finish our new original material album, and that, you know, that's something that I in particular need to immerse myself in, because we've got lots of bits and pieces which everybody's presented, which is good, and they just need to be shaped. We've done quite a lot of the shaping then with them too, but I've now got to create the song that sits with all these different ideas that are there. And so, you know, we're kind of halfway there with that now anyway, I think. So that should be early next year, ready for we'll do a spring tour again.
So, of course, keep your eyes peeled for that. Thank you very much for joining me. And,
thank you for having me.
No, it's been a pleasure, and good luck with your Brazilian tour that you've got going. I mean, it's always exciting to go to.
Last time I went, I was with Stuart, and we went up to that big statue of Jesus, which is on a mountain there, and he jumped off the cliff with the Brazilian hang gliding champion, went floating off over the landscape below.
Wow!
So, and I don't know, I must have made my way down by myself. I can't remember going down, but that was he's very brave. He's the one that does all the scariest rides on the fairground.
So you're not going to be convinced to do it this time, then?
No, I have done that thing, being dragged along by a boat, you know, with a parachute. You know,
yes.
He insisted that I did that when we were in Thailand, but that was okay. I just had to let go and commune with the spirits of the air. You know.
Well, thank you very much.
Okay.
Yes.